circulation and gas exchange. I have this in 46 done. I believe I posted both of those. I'm working on 49 and 50. I should get those done. That's more like 2 chapters in 1. I kind of like pick bits and pieces out of both of those. I'll post that today in the study guide for the exam. So we're getting there. The circulation and gas exchange. You don't have to write this stuff down. It's in italics, remember. Trading with the environment, exchange of materials and energy occurs between an organism and its environment. How they do it depends on the organism because different organisms do it different ways. It depends on the type of organism, the size of the organism, the environment in which the organism lives. Exchange occurs at the cellular level. It could be directly, as in the case of unicellular organisms, or indirectly, as in multicellular organisms. If you're a unicellular paramecium, you can do everything across the surface of your cell. Okay, you're just one cell, and diffusion works beautifully in cases like this. For us, we've got too many cells in between the outer environment and the places where it needs to go in our bodies. So we kind of throw in the circulatory system to help deliver those materials where they need to go as close as we can get them there. And then at that level, we see diffusion occurring, either from the bloodstream, either into the lungs, or we look at digestion that we just had. We start breaking stuff down, and nutrients are absorbed from the digestive tract into the circulatory system, taking wherever they need to go. So we talk about circulation and gas exchange for indirect organisms like us because we've got too many cells between us and the outside world. Circulation usually helps us to compensate our thickness. Diffusion alone is inadequate to moving materials around an organism. I don't know what "and" is in there for, especially if it's over a few millimeters in size. We are definitely over a few millimeters in size. Circulatory systems compensate for size in multicellular organisms. Okay. Circulation reflects phylogeny. Our evolutionary history is based upon what we need the circulatory system for. Again, the environments in which we live, which we evolved out of, and our requirements or our needs. Invertebrate circulation will start with the more primitive and work our way to the more advanced. And so with gastrovascular cavities, bodies being only 2 cell layers thick, diffusion is optimal in transporting nutrients throughout the organism. Cnidarians, platyhelminthes. What are platyhelminthes? Flatworms. The name literally means flatworms. Cnidarians are the stinging cell organisms like sea anemone, jellyfish, the hydra. When you're only a couple of cell layers thick, it's easy for diffusion to work very easily, very nicely. It gets materials from point A to point B relatively quickly. So gastrovascular cavities, what happens is food, nutrients come into one area, it's broken down, and then it's transported throughout the entire body. No circulatory system, no digestive system. They keep it simple. And so a simple process like diffusion works very nicely for them. So it shows you where the mouth is. Behind that would be the gastrovascular cavity. As nutrients break down, they'll be transported through the radial canal, circular canal, and again, mostly by diffusion. No circulation, no other means of getting the stuff around. It's just through these canals by diffusion. Open circulatory system and closed circulatory system. And don't put it past me to put this on there again, because I like to see if you guys improve, if you figure things out, if you can actually come up with the right answers second time around. Open circulatory system, one or more hearts pumps hemolymph. Notice it is not blood. We don't talk about blood this stage in evolution. Hemolymph is a blood-like substance. It carries out the same function, transporting materials around. However, it pumps it into sinuses surrounding organs. It leaves the vessels. That's the important thing about open circulatory system. Hemolymph, fluid, whatever you want to call it, just don't call it blood, leaves the vessels. And it'll enter sinuses surrounding organs. Body movement squeeze sinuses assisting in circulating hemolymph. Example, arthropods, most mollusks. sure you do. Sometimes you put down mollusks for open and closed circulatory system. I didn't split hairs like that this much this time. If you put it down mollusks for either or, I accepted it. The mollusks that have a closed circulatory system are specifically the cephalopods. So what happens? The heart pumps the fluid out. And again, we're talking about a heart, we're just talking about a little extra musculature in the circulatory system, in one of the vessels. And it pumps the fluid through some vessels, but eventually it leaves the vessels. It bathes all the organs in this fluid, and then it drains back into the heart where it'll start all over again. And you can see it there in the grasshopper example of an arthropod. Any questions about open circulatory system? Does it make sense now? Everybody see? The opposite is closed circulatory system. One or more hearts pumps blood into vessels which branch into smaller and smaller vessels. Blood never leaves the vessels. Earthworms, cephalopods, and vertebrates. Okay, I split the hairs this time. So you can't put down mollusks for both. Most mollusks will be acceptable, or mollusk for open circulatory system, cephalopods for closed. You have a closed circulatory system. Like I've said before, sometimes you're your own best cheat sheet. Think about yourself. It's okay to use humans as examples. You don't always have to pick some type of remote or distant example for these exercises. If you want to use the same thing over and over again, I don't care. I don't go for creativity, I go for what's right. Okay, no extra points for creativity, just get it right. That impresses me more than anything. Earthworms, cephalopods, and vertebrates. And you see in this case, you have the heart here, pumps the blood through, the vessel gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and then they return as they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And we'll talk about how all that works too. So a closed circulatory system. Now, I know you guys are just sitting on the edge of your seats with this open and closed circulatory system, probably the most exciting thing you've thought about all day. And some of you are probably sitting there thinking, man, he's right. This is the most exciting thing I've thought about all day. And then you start to reevaluate your life all of a sudden, don't you? Well, what you might also be thinking, and again, I'm just amusing myself here because I can. What's better than an open or closed circulatory system? Well, it's got to be closed because that's what's in more advanced organisms. Well, which is better? It depends. In an open circulatory system, it requires less energy in operation and maintenance. Also provides support during molting. Molting is a very energy expensive activity for most organisms that go through molts. We talk about things like arthropods, for instance. And it's a very difficult time for them because they've lost the outer shell. They're growing a new shell. It's very soft and pliable at this time, so they're very vulnerable. They probably hide away, keep away from predators so they don't get eaten at this time. And what they want to do is they want to puff their little bodies up, making them as big as possible, so as that shell hardens, it gives them room to grow. You ever gone out shopping for clothes and you know you're going to be going on vacation or a cruise or holidays are coming up and you buy a little bit bigger because you know you're going to be putting on weight? And if you buy the same clothes you've been buying all along, you know they're just not going to fit. That's what these guys do. They puff themselves up so they don't have to go through a molt again and again and again. And they have a little bit of room to grow. So provide support during molting. Closed, more efficient material transport, most highly developed invertebrates. So, which is better? It depends. The more primitive animals that evolved with an open circulatory system, that works beautifully for them. The closed, for the animals that were more highly evolved, more highly developed, that works beautifully for them. So which is better? You can't say one's better or worse. The organisms that use it well, so it's good for whoever has it. Again, the octopus is an example of a cephalopod, just like the squid, the chambered nautilus, the cuttlefish, they all have closed circulatory systems. Okay, we're going to talk about kind of like the evolution of the heart right now. And we're going to go through the groups from more primitive to the more advanced. And so as we go through this, kind of pick out what distinguishes one heart from one organism to the next, where it is on the evolutionary ladder, and basically focus on the number of chambers. That's what's going to change the most. So for instance, first up, the fish. Most fish have one ventricle, one atrium. Just out of curiosity, giving us a point of reference. How many atria do you have? Two. How many ventricles do you have? Two. So a total of 4 chambers. Fish only have 2. They have gill and systemic circulation. When we talk about systemic, we're talking about it goes throughout the entire system, throughout the entire organism. So all parts of the body are going to be serviced by the circulatory system. The gill part, well, that's where it picks up oxygen. Makes sense, right? Blood moves slowly. You have 2 capillary beds where blood pressure drops. We'll talk about that in a second. So here we have the heart and the atrium. The blood flows this way, first through the atrium, then through the ventricle, to the first capillary bed in the gills, where it's going to drop off the deoxygenated blood, which is usually in the blue. The oxygenated is in red. So that's going to be pumped through to the systemic capillaries, dropping off this wherever it should be. This is a diagram. Don't think that it just has one capillary bed. Like us, it probably has multiple capillary beds. This just represents the capillary beds in general in the systemic area. And then it drops off the oxygen, picks up the carbon dioxide, brings it back, and does the whole thing all over again. What do you got? Makes sense? Any questions? As I go through, as I set this up, I try to do it the same way so it's easy for you to follow, especially when you go to study. So for instance, amphibians, they have 1 ventricle, 2 atria. They have homocutaneous and systemic circulation. We talked about this in lab when we dissected the frog. Before I forget, speaking of lab, just to remind you, we don't have lab on Friday because we don't have school on Friday. Okay, so you get 3 a weekend. Yay. Homocutaneous. Pulmonary always refers to what? Lungs. Cutaneous refers to what? Oh, you shot that lung out pretty quick. What? Skin. Right. If you get a shot subcutaneous, where are you getting the shot? Under the skin. So homocutaneous means it goes to the lung and the skin. I told you the skin is so thin. Remember, frogs don't have scales. Your skin is so thin. I told you, when you peel back the skin and you start to dissect it, look underneath, on the underneath side, you see a lot of blood vessels there. Lungs are itty bitty, but that skin acts like a third lung, so it helps to aerate the blood. And systemic circulation. It has double circulation, oxygen poor blood to lungs and the skin, oxygen rich blood to the body. So we have a little bit more of a division here. Here is 1 atrium and ventricle where the blood comes in and pumps it out to the homocutaneous circuit, the lung and skin capillaries, where it drops off the carbon dioxide, picks up the oxygen, it comes back and circles through to the system, drops off the oxygen, picks up the carbon dioxide, brings it back to the heart and back out again. If you notice, there's not a perfectly solid wall here separating the 2 sides of the heart. So you're going to get a little bit of mixture going on here of the oxygen-rich blood and the oxygen-poor blood. How would that affect the organism? What?
Your heat, your body heat?
Not so much the body heat. It's cold-blooded.
It's a less efficient design.
Less efficient. Why? You're on the right track.
Because the heart is going to be moving so much fluid, which is going to take so much energy to move that fluid
Right.
X distance. But the fluid that's heading towards the areas where it's going to be enriched is not going to need it as much as, like in our system, we send really oxygen poor blood to the lungs. So it's complete separation.
Right. Which makes it more efficient, like you said. So what happens is when you get a little bit of mixing of blood, you've got a little bit of oxygen-poor blood going with mostly oxygen-rich blood, but it makes the organism less efficient. How does that make it less efficient? Lowers the metabolic rate. But if you're cold-blooded, if you're an amphibian, metabolic rate isn't going to be your forte. You're going to be pretty mellow, pretty laid back anyway, just because you're cold-blooded. You're poikilotherm, you're an ectotherm, the proper terminology. Reptiles, 1 ventricle, 2 atria, partial second ventricle. It's almost like they have 3 1/2. instead of just 3. But a lot of times that partial second ventricle is just separated by a perforated wall, meaning it has holes in it. So you still get a little bit of mixing of the oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor blood. Pulmonary and systemic, just like us, it just goes to the lungs and the rest of the system. Double circulation, less mixing of oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor blood. When we talk about the double circulation, we're talking about it goes to the lungs and the capillaries, and then to the systemic. That's what double circulation means. So it leaves the heart, goes to the lung, picks up the oxygen-rich blood, comes back. You see a little bit of separation here, but not completely. Goes to the rest of the body. Here you have some of the blood coming out and still mixing with some of the oxygen-rich blood, which again diminishes the ability of the animal to be more metabolically active because the blood just isn't as oxygenated as it should be, as it is with ours. I probably wouldn't ask this of you on short answer, short essay part. What I could do is put it in the multiple choice. I could lay down descriptions of the systems and then ask you, is this fish, amphibian, reptile, or mammal? Birds and mammals, we have the same. Although keep in mind, good, true, false question, the fact that we both have 4-chamber cards, but remember, we evolved those 4-chamber cards independently. We did not have a common ancestor. Okay, but because we were both metabolically active, because we're both warm blood, it's something that just naturally followed. But in those circumstances, both sets of organisms need 4-chamber cards. That's what we all ended up with, birds and mammals. 2 ventricles, 2 atria, pulmonary and systemic circulation, so double circulation. Left side, oxygen-rich blood, right side, oxygen-poor blood. This supports endothermicity. What's endothermicity? Big fancy word, but it just means what? Heat. Warm-bloodedness, heat. Okay, here's what happens. Now, when you think of this, wait a second, looks like this is oxygen-poor blood over here, and this is the oxygen-rich blood, but you gotta look at it this way. Okay, so you're looking at it, but it's opposite because you're looking down at the front of the animal. So the blood comes in from the rest of the body into the right atrium, right ventricle, and it pumps it to the heart. So it goes from here to here, a very short distance. Okay, right ventricle is smaller than the left ventricle. It gets oxygenated. It comes back into the left atrium, left ventricle, which is very muscular because it has to go from here to here. And to here, all the way down to there, and back again. Keep that in mind. And so it leaves the heart, goes to all parts of the body, delivering oxygen-rich blood, dropping off oxygen, picking up the carbon dioxide, bringing it back to the heart, and the whole thing repeats itself over and over again. If you're lucky.
So the red is the oxygen.
Rich blood and blue is the oxygen-poor. But you're looking at this, looks like it's labeled backwards. You gotta look at it like this, not like this. Okay? Okay, talk a little bit about the heart, double circulation in humans. Cardiac cycle, one complete cycle of pumping and filling the heart. That's that loved up, loved up, loved up, loved up. Pumping and filling. Systole is the contraction that pumps blood. Diastole is the relaxation, fills with blood. Loved up, loved up, loved up. Now, we're not going to get into all the detail of this. Again, if you want all this, take an anatomy and physiology course. We just don't have the time to cover it all in so much detail. Atrial and ventricular diastole, the AV valves open. You've got valves between the atria and the ventricles on both sides. As they open, blood flows from the atrium into the ventricles. Then the semilunar valves close. You find these valves in the arteries leading the heart. Now, we're going to dissect the fetal pig. And you can look for this stuff if you want to, but it's going to be difficult to find. Why? What? Underdeveloped. It's a fetal pig. It's relying more on mom's circulatory system than it is on its own, so these things aren't quite fully developed yet. Then we get step 2, atrial systole, ventricular diastole. So the blood flows from the atrium into the ventricle, and it starts to force the blood up, building up pressure. So ventricular systole, atrial diastole. These valves close between the atrium and the ventricles, and the valves and the arteries open, the arteries and the veins, because what happens is you don't want blood flowing backwards, okay? You want it to keep flowing in the same direction. That's why all the valves keep the blood flowing in the same direction. Cardiac output, volume of blood, the left ventricle pumps per minute. Average stroke volume, 75 millimeters per contraction. Average cardiac output, 5.25 liters per minute. That's moving a lot of blood. But I mean, you don't have to know all the details. Just know cardiac output, volume of blood, the left ventricle pumps per minute. And so, same thing again. Right atrium, right ventricle. This is going out of the right ventricle to the lungs. It comes back in from the lungs into the left atrium, the left ventricle, then out to all parts of the body. This left ventricle is larger and much more muscular than the right ventricle. It has to be, because it has to pump the blood harder. And so when we talk about what the left ventricle is doing, it's not that we favor the left side more than the right side. This is the part that pumps to all parts of the body. That's why we're more interested in the cardiac output there than in the right ventricle. You don't need to know these, just to kind of fill in blanks. You've got AV or atrioventricular valves located between atrium and ventricle. We kind of mentioned those already. Semilunar valves located at 2 axes of the heart, the aorta and pulmonary artery. The sinoatrial node sets rate and timing at which all cardiac muscle cells contract. In the right atrium, we'll talk more about that when we get to the nervous system. Atrioventricular or AV node relay, which ensures the ventricles contract after the atria, 0.1 second between right atrium and right ventricle. So a tenth of a second in between the contraction of the right atrium and the right ventricle. Okay, because you want that blood to be squeezed after it enters the right atrium so it moves into the right ventricle. You don't want it to be backwards, or else your heart's going to be pumping empty chambers. And that would not be very efficient. So everything's designed so the heart beats in synchrony, as it should, to most efficiently move blood throughout your body. Heart murmur. As we go through this, I'll put this little symbol down in the lower left-hand corner. Indicates a health problem, health issue. A heart murmur problem in which blood squirts back through a defective valve. Sometimes valves are defective. It could be congenital, it could be damaged through lifestyle, whatever the case might be. It could be from an injury or something like that. So the valve doesn't seal properly, and you don't get that clear, crisp lub-dub, 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 lub-dub. It's more muffled, more muted, because blood's flowing back through in the direction it's not supposed to go. And so it doesn't make that clear, crisp lub-dub, so it gets to be more of a murmur. And that's why they call it a heart murmur. As far as fixing the valves, they can go in and do open heart surgery and repair the valves. They can go to replace the valves. They could do it with a donor valve, obviously from something like a cadaver or another organism. Sometimes they use pigs, I believe, for valves, or they can even put a synthetic valve in. So, all kinds of possibilities there. Obviously, anything like this, you always go from least invasive to most invasive. You try and treat it with drugs first. If it becomes severe, to where the person passes out all the time because they're not getting that oxygen-rich blood, then they have to go in and do surgery. But you always try and treat things first before the surgery. Blood vessel structure. 3 layers of vessels. You have the outer, middle, and inner. So far, everybody good with that? 3 layers, outer, middle, inner. Outer is connective tissue with elastic fibers. Middle, smooth with elastic fibers, smooth muscle with elastic fibers. Inner is just the endothelium. Arteries have thick outer middle layers. Capillaries have only endothelium. Okay, let's start with the capillaries first. These are the smallest blood vessels you have. And they are only endothelium layers. That's it. No muscles, no elastic tissue. Capillaries are where diffusion occurs. And so when you get down to that level, you don't need a thick blood vessel. You need a blood 1 cell membrane thick. So that the blood, whatever it's carrying there, let's say oxygen in most cases, dumps the oxygen, you can pick up the carbon dioxide in one smooth movement. Because the oxygen carbon dioxide doesn't have far to travel. Okay, arteries and veins. Here's the connective tissue on the outside, the smooth muscle on the inside, and then the lining of the endothelium layer. Look at the artery. Connective tissue on the outside, smooth muscle here, but look how much smooth muscle you have in comparison. Why does the artery have thicker, smooth muscle? Yes. Do you think about circulating your blood or beating your heart? You sit there all the time thinking blood up.
More pressure?
Blood up. Somebody will ask you, what do you want for lunch? You just flattened because you forgot to think blood up. So it's all involuntary.
I was thinking pressure.
It has to deal with the pressure. First of all, it helps to move the blood through the body. So it's going to be squeezing a little bit and moving the blood through. But it has to be able to withstand the pressure of the heart. And that's why you have connective tissue around it as well. That's why it's elastic. It can give a little bit, but it can't give too much, because what that does is, as it pushes against the walls of the blood vessels, it can't go out, so it has to go through. So it forces the blood through the vessel. So outer connective tissue with elastic fibers, giving it some elasticity, some stretch, a little bit, but not much. You don't want the vessels to burst. If you get a thing in the wall of the vessel, you end up with something like an aneurysm, where it forms like a little balloon or bubble, and those are bad. They're relatively unpredictable, and when they burst, it's not a good thing. Chances are survival is not great after something like that. Middle, smooth muscle with elastic fibers. So again, more elastic fibers with the smooth muscle. More so in the arteries than in the veins. The veins are just bringing blood back to the heart. Pressure is almost zero in those areas. So you don't need the thicker smooth muscle and connective tissues. And then endothelium lines it. Well, endothelium is a type of epithelial tissue. Okay? We talked about this. It covers the outer body and lines most cavities in the inner body, including blood vessels. As diameter of the vessels decreases, velocity of blood flow increases. Well, that makes sense. I've got a fire hose, and I've got water flowing through that, and I keep attaching smaller and smaller hoses to it until I get down to a garden hose. What's going to happen to the pressure of the water? Increase or decrease? Increase, because I've got a smaller diameter open. So it's going to force more pressure through that smaller diameter open. Blood vessels are too different like that. As I get smaller and smaller blood vessels, the amount of pressure builds up higher and higher. However, little cross-sectional area of capillaries cause blood flow to decrease, more capillaries than larger vessels. So, in English, what that's saying is, as I'm coming down, all of a sudden, my small vessels start to branch in smaller and smaller vessels, but I have lots of them because of that branching. Okay? So, if you start dividing the pressure among all these branches, the blood pressure drops in these areas. Because I've got too many branches now, too many hoses coming off the one main hose. And you can see it here. Look how much the area increases going through capillary beds. Increases very significantly. Velocity, it'll slow down through the bed and then pick up a little bit more once it's passed through the capillary bed. But as far as pressure goes, you see a lot of pressure coming through. And as you enter the capillary bed, because of all the branching, it drops and it never really recovers. So how do you get it back to the heart? Well, we'll talk about that. So it does make sense that as blood vessels decrease in diameter, the pressure increases. And so it should continue to make sense that when you get to capillary beds, because of all the splitting of the blood vessels, because of the branching and everything, you increase the number of channels, pathways the blood can take, so pressure and velocity are going to drop. Blood pressure, hydrostatic pressure that blood exerts against the walls of vessels to propel blood. Like I said, it pushes against the walls of the vessel, it doesn't push out, can't go out, it's got to go through. And so that's what forces the blood through the blood vessels. It's greater in arteries than veins because arteries come off the heart. They're carrying the most pressure behind them because they are the ones that immediately leave the heart. You get peripheral resistance. What is that? What's peripheral mean? From the side to side, from the walls of the blood vessel, from the sides of the blood vessels, you get resistance which forces it through. The other big issue is gravity, neck length. You ever think about it? Look at the giraffe, how does it pump blood all the way up to its head? You ever stand up too fast and all of a sudden you get a little lightheaded? I'm not just talking about being lightheaded like this whole past weekend at Coachella Fest. Different kind of thing. Like you're just sitting there, you've been sitting for a while, you jump up and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, a little bit of a head rush because the blood's having to go up a little bit higher. Do you think giraffes walk around all the time being lightheaded? No. Well, for one thing, their skin's wrapped pretty tightly around their neck, keeping everything really, really tight. You ever seen a giraffe with double chins? No. They keep that skin really tight around there to help propel the blood up. They've got larger hearts. They've got other things too. Humans, to get to our head, you don't have to remember this, just fun to know facts, talk to your friends about it over lunch, whatever. We travel about 0.35 meters from here to here, a little bit over a foot. Okay? And so the amount of pressure is 27 millimeters of mercury, just say 27. Giraffe traveled 2.5 meters, so we're talking about, what, 11, let's say 6, 7.5, 8. It has 10 times the amount of pressure. So the heart is pumping 10 times harder to get the blood from the heart of the giraffe to the head. And when it does stuff like that, that's just crazy. I mean, it's got to come down and get a drink of water every now and then, but whatever. Dinosaurs who had 10 feet or 10 meters away from their hearts, 30 meters, look at, they had 3 times the amount of blood pressure to get it from the heart to the head. They had other adaptations too. A lot of the bones in the neck weren't real heavy. They were more like bird bones, which again gives rise to the idea that birds evolved from dinosaurs. And that they had a lot of hollow spaces in there, making the necks a little bit lighter, probably infiltrated with blood vessels to get it from heart to the head. Again, you don't need to know that, it's something fun to think about. Blood return. Okay, so I'm pumping hard out of the heart. I get, be careful because the blood loses water, becomes thicker, harder for the heart to pump it through, harder for it to get through some of the smaller areas. Serum is plasma without clotting factor. Sometimes you hear people talk about serum, using serum for different things. In research, we use serum a lot, but it wouldn't have done as much good if it had the clotting factor. Again, we'll talk about clotting factors now. So a couple of terms there you might hear, plasma and serum. Plasma liquid matrix with cells in suspension, 55% of blood composition is plasma. Plasma itself is made up of 90% water. Serum is plasma without clotting factor. Plasma substances, you have electrolytes to help maintain osmotic balance of blood, buffers blood to pH 7.4. That 7.4 is pretty firm. You can't play around with that too much. If it goes too high or too low, you could be in serious trouble. But there are so many buffers in your blood, you'd almost have to take a hit from pure acid, like hydrochloric or something like that, in order for it to alter that. Nutrients, proteins, hormones, respiratory gases, carbon dioxide and oxygen, metabolic waste. You find all of this stuff in blood. It's the transport medium to get things through that you need and gets rid of things that you no longer need. So nutrients, proteins, hormones, respiratory gases, and metabolic wastes. blood down. Easy for me to say 3 times fast. We're going to break blood down and look at the different cells that you find in blood. First up are the erythrocytes, or commonly called red blood cells. And it's like everything else, is going to be set up in a very similar format: from the erythrocytes, the leukocytes, the white blood cells, and the platelets that are coming up. Main function is to transport oxygen. Inversely, also carbon dioxide. You dump the oxygen, you got room available, you pick up the carbon dioxide and bring it back. They tend to be small. Now when we say small, even white blood cells are going to be small, but we're talking about a comparison with other components of the blood. Red blood cells are smaller than white blood cells. They're 7 to 8.5 micrometers in diameter. What's a micrometer? A speck of dust is about 100 micrometers across. So you're talking about something that's about 1/10 the size of a speck of dust. These are the most numerous of the blood components. In fact, one of the more numerous blood cell types you have. You have somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 100 trillion cells in your body. 25 trillion of those are red blood cells. And they make up about 5 liters total in your body. They contain hemoglobin, which is oftentimes abbreviated HB. Also, they lack nuclei and mitochondria, at least in mammals. They generate ATP by anaerobic metabolism. Okay, a couple things here. They lack nuclei. Why would you want a red blood cell without a nucleus? Why? How? What's the downside of having a nucleus? Too big. It takes up a lot of space. So we kick that out, gives more room to carry the oxygen. Why the mitochondria? No respiration. Why don't you want to carry out respiration? Because it uses up oxygen. Aerobic cellular respiration uses oxygen. So you kick out the thing that takes up a lot of room, you kick out the thing that takes up oxygen. It's like a big tanker truck full of gasoline having to drive from LA to New York. It's not going to tap into the truck, into the tank in the back, to use the fuel, because by the time you get to your destination, you're going to be that much short. The truck has its own tanks that it uses for fuel. It doesn't rely on the fuel that it's transporting. Same thing here. The red blood cells aren't going to tap into the oxygen they're transporting, but make them less efficient. So they generate energy, or ATP, by anaerobic metabolism without the benefit of mitochondria. You have about 250 million molecules of hemoglobin per red blood cell. Each hemoglobin binds 4 molecules of oxygen, therefore each red blood cell carries 1 billion molecules of oxygen. That's just kind of mind-numbing. You don't need to know that. Again, more fun to know facts. Leukocytes are the white blood cells. Function, they defend against the pathogen. That's their main job. Control your body, looking for things that don't belong there. They are large, 10 to 20 micrometers in diameter, almost 2 to 3 times larger than red blood cells. 25 to 50 billion, not trillion. Notice that. You have many fewer white blood cells per 5 liters of blood. However, if you get an infection, white blood cells tend to increase, at least during the time of the infection. Post-infection, they seem to go away. White blood cells are nucleated, and there's 5 different types of white blood cells. You don't learn them here. Just be aware there's multiple types of white blood cells and that they are nucleated. Talks about mammals not having nuclei. I've got blood I can show you of amphibians, reptiles. They have nuclei. Strangely enough, birds have nuclei in their blood. They're warm-blooded. They have high metabolic rates like mammals. Why do they have nuclei? I don't know. They do. Platelets. Their main function, their main job is blood clotting. They are fragments of cells about 2 to 3 micrometers in diameter. They're itty bitty in size. Anywhere from 750 to 1,750 billion per 5 liters. These also lack nuclei. We'll talk more about their function in just a second. So you've got the red blood cells, which are the smaller cell type, that are much more numerous. You've got the white blood cells, not so numerous, but the larger cell type. Both the red blood cells and the platelets lack nuclei, the white blood cells have nuclei. Again, this would set up some good multiple choice questions. I give you the characteristics to be able to identify the type, whether it's red blood cell, white blood cell, or platelet. So how do platelets work? Well, they form blood clots. Self-sealing components of blood to stop bleeding, oftentimes triggered by injuries. You get a cut in your skin, all of a sudden, everything goes into clotting mode. Let's figure out how to get this clot stopped, get the bleeding stopped. Let's get this person back on the road to recovery. Fibrinogen is an inactive clotting factor. When a clot is triggered, the whole process of clotting is triggered, fibrinogen is converted into fibrin, which is the active clotting factor. And then platelets are incorporated to flood the bleed. Here's another diagram on this. People who are hemophiliacs are missing one of the clotting factors. Maybe they don't have fibrinogen, so they can't produce fibrin. So in the case of a clot, fibrinogen is converted into fibrin to help in clotting. Why isn't clotting factor just circulating throughout your body all the time? Do you really want blood to clot? You don't have a cut? Does that happen sometimes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Professor Rostock, if you're anemic, are you like lacking fibrinogen? No.
If you're anemic, you're lacking iron or red blood cells.
Okay.
That's what happens to people with anemia.
Okay.
They have a reduction of production of those things.
Okay. Doesn't that have to have something to do with clotting too? No.
I don't know. Not directly, maybe indirectly.
Okay.
Okay, here's what happens. Collagen fibers become damaged, so you get a leak in a vessel. Platelet releases chemicals that make nearby platelets sticky. Clotting factors from platelets, damaged cells, plasma. Factors include calcium, vitamin K, also circulating in the plasma. Prothrombin, which is another clotting factor, becomes thrombin. What it does is it triggers fibrinogen to become fibrin. So kind of left out this step. This is the more direct step though. So what happens is the platelets begin to plug the bleed, and the fibrin comes in and does a better job of plugging the bleed. Here are red blood cells incorporated into the clot. Here's these strands, what looks like silly string, that's part of the fibrin. We go back a second, you see it all here, the red blood cells, the strands of fibrin, and this is what eventually clots the bleed. So what happens when blood clots when you don't want it to? Well, you get thrombus, formation of a clot inside blood vessels in the absences of injury. For some reason, your blood just clots. Normal blood flow, blood's flowing through, no problem. Deep vein thrombosis, you have blood clots forming. This is a bad thing. An even badder thing, I know it's worse. An even worse thing is when some of this clot breaks off and starts flowing through your circulatory system. When it does this, it becomes an embolus. You get bolus there, so you know it's a ball of a clot flowing through. Why does that get to be a bad thing?
Sure.
It could go to your brain. What happens up there?
Stroke.
create a stroke because you block the blood flow. Basically, if it ends up anywhere in the body, especially in any areas serviced by the smallest of capillaries. In your lungs, it could be a problem. In your digestive system, in your liver, anywhere it goes, pretty much, this could be a problem. Okay, so these are bad things. What you can do is you can put somebody on a blood thinner, which prevents the formation of clots. Downside. If you get cut, you can't stop bleeding because you're on blood thinners. So there's a two-edged sword there. Hemophilia. Genetic mutation that affects any step of the clotting process, resulting in excessive bleeding from even minor injuries. So you're missing a clotting factor. You get a cut, you bleed, you bleed, you bleed, you bleed. You don't stop bleeding. Now, this is genetically inherited. This is the family line of Queen Victoria, who ruled England in the late 1800s. Because the British royalty are very particular about their lineages, they keep track of everybody and everything. We've got really good evidence of how this kind of flowed from one generation to the next. No pun intended. Okay, so if you're clear and white, like Queen Victoria, you're a carrier female. If you're round and white. If you're green, you're a normal female. If you're a blue square, you're a normal male. If you're an orange square, you're a hemophiliac male. Just be aware, this is on the X chromosome, so only females can be carriers. Okay? Males cannot be carriers, they either are or they aren't. So Queen Victoria is a carrier. We see in this generation, we've got another carrier here and over here. Most of the females in this generation are normal, most of the males are normal, but we get Leopold, who's a hemophiliac. However, he did succeed in marrying and having kids of his own. He produced a normal female who, in her offspring, produced a normal male, a normal female, and a hemophiliac. And you see all throughout this, where they just travels throughout the family line. Yes.
Isn't that from also interbreeding in that
It
family
could be.
line? But in that particular family line, wasn't it because the
Hard to
royalty?
say because of Victoria and Albert, but yeah, if there's relatives breeding close together, if they have, trying to look for.
Because I thought I saw that they were, or read somewhere that they wanted to keep the royalty
Well,
within the
They
family.
do that. They do that. Sometimes they interbreed. I don't see anything.
Isn't that branching right there? Like this Victoria and a
No,
male.
what I was looking for is where you might have had a carrier female and hemophiliac male breeding, but I don't see that on there anywhere.
So how do they stop the chain by not having females? Is that what it is? Because the females are the carriers, right?
Well, in this case, they haven't stopped the change. You see, even in the last generation, you don't see any female carriers. They just kind of disappear for a little while, but you have a lot of male hemophiliacs there. So it was even until these generations. Look how many bled to death. Died at 20. Died in infancy. Murdered. Well, it wouldn't take much, but you could stab him with a pen. Step back.
That is funny.
Step
Slow
back.
down, but it is death. Stem cells, cell replacement. We talk about stem cells all the time, usually associated with embryos, but you have stem cells all over your body. You have them in and around your heart, you have them in and around your genitalia, the ovaries and testes, and you have your bone marrow. Pluripotent stem cell source from which cellular elements develop. Ability to differentiate in any blood cell type, found in marrow of ribs, vertebrae, sternum, and the pelvis. So you've got a stem cell, and it's in the bone marrow. Now it goes to development. If it stays in the bone marrow, it becomes these white blood cells. However, let's lymphoid stem cells. Put it over here to the lymphocytes. If it goes lymphocytes, what happens? You get B cells and T cells, and this develops B cells and T cells. That's a type of white blood cell. Myeloid stem cells develop the red blood cells as well as the white blood cells. So you've got a cell type that hasn't been committed to one type of blood cell or another. Can you make a new human from this? Probably not. When you get stem cells located in specific areas like this, they have limited ability. They can't give you every cell type, but they can give you every blood cell type. You're not going to get neurons out of this, you're not going to get muscle cells out of this, you're just going to get types of blood cells. So the myeloid stem cells give rise to the red blood cells, platelets, and all the different types of white blood cells, except for the ones that travel over to the lymphoid stem cells, that travel to become lymphocytes, specific with B cells and T cells. We'll talk more about those. Do we? We don't. I keep saying that. I don't think we do immunity in here. I don't think we have time for that. 504. Erythropoietin. I should put that out there to see how many people can spell it. That'd be kind of fun. Now I gotta grade it. That would be too fun. Sometimes called EPL, hormone which stimulates the production of red blood cells. Red blood cells turn over every 3 to 4 months. These are one of the high traffic areas of the body. The skin cells, the red blood cells, and the stomach lining cells. We've hit on a couple of these already. Here's the red blood cells. There's such a high turnover for this stuff because they're constantly on the go. They're constantly picking up oxygen, dropping it off to all parts of the body, picking up carbon dioxide from all parts of the body, bringing it back. There's no downtime for red blood cells. You're constantly busy. And eventually you break down and you're done. Reduction in oxygen triggers EPO synthesis. It's a negative feedback mechanism. Higher elevations. That's why some athletes train higher elevations because there's not as much oxygen here. And so they pick up more EPO. When they go to compete at lower elevation, might give them a slight advantage. Sometimes people inject EPO to increase their red blood cells, which increases oxygen carriage, which makes you more metabolically active. So it is an alternative to steroids. Not as easy to detect the steroids because it's something your body naturally produces. Sometimes what athletes will do is they'll donate red blood cells basically to themselves. And then during a big meet, they'll take those red blood cells they've set aside somewhere in some kind of blood bank or something, have it put back inside of them, and now they've got more red blood cells. Again, better at carrying more oxygen during competition. It's an unfair advantage. But it's something that you hear about. I've heard a lot about it in cycling. That was pretty popular during Lance Armstrong's era. You try it, you get caught. Oh well. Leukemia, cancerous line of stem cells that overproduce white blood cells, sometimes known as the blood cancer. You're thinking, okay, some white blood cells are good, more better, right? No, not in this case. What happens is red blood cells, stem cells are crowded out. What you can do for treatment is destroy bone marrow and restock it with non-cancerous stem cells. For an individual, all you would need would be 30 cells to repopulate the entire body. How crazy is that? It's a pretty risky treatment. You have this done, you can't be around anybody for a while because you basically shut down your immune system. So you're held in isolation in controlled areas so you don't get any infections because a common cold could kill you. Alliteration. Common cold could kill you. And this is some of the stuff they're trying, not exactly like this, but similar to dealing with AIDS patients, people with HIV. Trying to wipe out these cells, do transfusions, try and rebuild the body pretty much from the ground back up. Again, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
So when they harvest the cells, they're doing it their own, right? They're harvesting their own cells, and
Yeah, they'd almost have to, otherwise they would be
because it wouldn't work. But
wiped out. Yeah. The body would attack them and shut them down for being foreign objects in the body.
I really do sometimes.
Cardiovascular disease, kind of touched on this already. Disorders of heart and blood vessels accounts for 1/2 of all U.S. deaths. The sad thing is, most of the stuff is preventable. If it's in your genetics, we talked about leptin. If your body does not produce that, then you might have problems with maintaining your weight, which could lead to cardiovascular disease. However, smoking, stop smoking if you do it. Sedentary lifestyle, get out and exercise a little bit. High animal fat diet, cut down on that stuff. And these are the things that directly affect the cardiovascular system. I love this picture. Obviously, the kid's overweight. He's sitting there with a bag of chips. What do you want to bet that soda's not diet? He's got the remote right here, but he's also close enough to the TV that if he happens to drop the remote and the couch doesn't want to go dig it out, all he has to do is reach forward and change channel or whatever. Kind of sad. I like that picture. He's got another bag of snacks here too. He's good. He could probably sit there all evening, all evening, and never have to get up. So like I tell you, smoking is very bad. Sedentary lifestyle. Get out and do something. You don't have to join a gym necessarily. You don't have to join a running or a biking club or anything like that. You don't have to train for marathons. Find something that you like to do, that you can do. Maybe it's just taking a walk 20 or 30 minutes a day, 3 days a week. And maybe that might lead to longer walks, maybe hikes, doing something where you're getting out and enjoying yourself. If you join a gym and you hate it and it's pure torture, you get a trainer and you think they are a sadist because they like inflicting pain on you, then you're not going to want to stick with it. You're going to quit. Okay? Find something you enjoy doing. Find something. Watch your diet. Cut back on the animal fats. Use plant fats. They're healthier for you. Cut back on things high in cholesterol. Just eat healthy. Arteriosclerosis, hardening or narrowing of the arteries, and hypertension, high blood pressure. If you start to get hardening or narrowing of the arteries, then yes, you will become hypertensive. You know the types. These are people that yell more than talk. They get red in the face very easily, maybe all the time. They're not very relaxed. They're always kind of edgy, even when they try and be relaxed. It doesn't come across as relaxed. When you get narrowing, what can happen is plaque builds up in the wall and kind of closes it off, and blood flow is restricted. Remember, your blood vessels have that elastic on the outside to make them flexible. But if that becomes hardened, then it's also going to adversely affect your blood flow. Yeah. I'm sorry?
What is plaque made of?
I think it's triggered by fats, cholesterol, things like that. Anybody got anything else?
Your teeth.
What? Yeah, that's why you gotta watch your intake of that stuff. And that's why sometimes people who, even if they watch their diet and exercise, might still have high cholesterol, but still develop something like this. Heart attack and stroke. Sometimes they call strokes brain attack because basically the same thing happens. Death of cardiac tissue due to prolonged blockage of one or more coronary arteries. We talk about arteries of the heart. We're not talking about the big ones that go in and out of the heart. There are a lot of blood vessels on the surface of the heart that you'll see when we dissect the heart once they come in. And it's these arteries that we're talking about. So if you start blocking the arteries that feed the heart the nutrients it needs, then it's going to adversely affect the ability of the heart to work. Stroke, death of nervous tissue due to blockage, rupture of one or more arteries in the head. What can happen? Pieces of plaque can break free, travel to the brain, and block blood vessels that supply blood to the brain. Clots can do the same thing. That's why we talked about the clots earlier. Like I said, sometimes they call strokes brain attacks because it's basically the same effect, just in two different areas. So everything we've been talking about related to cardiovascular disease. It's why it's important, especially when you're younger. I know you're mortal, you'll think you'll live forever. That will hurt you or harm you until you get older. Start taking care of yourself now. It gets harder when you get older. And you'll find out what I'm talking about the time you hit 30. That's when you start slowing down a little bit. Gas exchange. I gotta go make a quick phone call. I'll be right back. Write this down. We'll finish this. Breathing is what we're talking about. How do you get the oxygen inside the body to the places? Okay. I take of oxygen from and discharge of carbon dioxide into the environment. It supports ATP production during respiration for the organism to carry out aerobic cellular respiration. Water, these aquatic animals, and air for terrestrial animals are sources of oxygen. Respiratory breathing. What do you breathe through? Well, that's oxygen. We breathe in oxygen. Higher concentration of oxygen in air than water. Molecules diffuse more easily through air than water, less energy required. It makes sense. Air is thinner than water. It's not as thick, it's not as heavy. And so it makes sense that it would be easier to take oxygen out of air than water. But remember, we all started in water. All life on Earth first evolved in water and then came out of land. This is one of the things we had to overcome. Be able to breathe on land as opposed to breathing in water.
This is kind of a little off subject, but do embryos have gills?
Yes,
Okay.
pharyngeal gill slits. As they mature, they close up. The lungs are among the last things to develop. That's why the baby's born premature. It has to go into the incubator with a lot of oxygen to help compensate for that so the lungs can continue to develop. So until that time, it's dependent upon the mother's circulatory system to deliver oxygen to the baby. They do have pharyngeal gill slits at first. How long those persist? Probably not as long as you might think. Like I said, that's where the circulatory system comes in from the mom to deliver oxygen.
Like by the time it starts to look like a baby, or those gill
They're probably
slits?
gone.
Yeah. Okay.
Respiratory surface, thin and moist, large surface area. It doesn't matter if you're aquatic or terrestrial. What we did is we kept our lungs moist by trapping them inside of our body, surrounding them with tissues so they don't dehydrate, they don't evaporate, they don't desiccate. Gas exchange occurs by diffusion. And you're sitting there thinking, okay, I get it. If you're a paramecium, if you're a planarian, or anything else that starts with the letter P that's really small and thin, I get it. But how does that work for us? It seems to contradict everything you told us about the circulatory system. In the lungs, at the smallest, thinnest structures from the lungs, the alveolar sacs, they're pushed up right against the capillaries, which are very small and thin. You're only talking about 2 or 3 cell membranes of thickness there that the oxygen has to cross to get into the bloodstream, and the carbon dioxide has to cross to get into the lungs. So at that point in us, yes, diffusion does occur. And then it's up to the circulatory system to deliver the oxygen where it needs to go throughout the rest of the body. Larger endotherms and ectotherms due to metabolic activity. The salamander here is going to have a relatively small surface area in its lungs, whereas us, as humans, as warm-blooded mammals, we have much larger surface areas in our lungs. So larger endotherms are warm-blooded organisms than ectotherms are cold-blooded organisms due to metabolic activity. Tiger salamander, in case anybody's gills, outfolding to the body's surface, suspended in water. We've already seen a couple of things already in our dissections. We saw gills in the fish, obviously. We saw them in the squid. We also saw them in the crayfish. The only thing we've seen with lungs thus far has been the frog. Ventilation of aquatic organisms, increase of water flow over the gills. So they have some ability to increase the amount of water flow over the gills. I thought this was pretty good, the axolotl pedomorphosis, remember him? Retaining juvenile traits into adulthood because it's like, hey, I want to stay underwater. I don't want to get eaten going to the surface to gulp air. I'd like to keep the gills, please, thank you. But you can definitely see in here how they're just outcroppings of the skin. How they continue with the skin and grow out, and yet still serving as gills, part of the respiratory system. fish gills, they have something known as a counter current exchange. Now we talked about this with temperature. Remember the counter current exchange, blood flowed through the feet of birds, the flipper or the dolphin. As it flows out, it's warm. As it comes back in, it's cold. But the blood vessels that go out and in are right next to each other. So as the one goes out, it kind of warms up the one coming in a little bit. Remember that countercurrent heat exchange? Well, we're talking about the countercurrent exchange as far as respiration goes. Opposite flow of blood and gills to direction of water passing over the gills. Remove 80% of oxygen from water. That's not too bad. And dumps carbon dioxide at the same time. So here's water flow over the gills. Starts at 100%, 70, 40, 15. That's a percent of oxygen. Blood flow through the lamellae, through the gills. As it's coming over, it's drawing the oxygen out, so it's oxygen poor, and it gets oxygen richer as it draws the oxygen from the blood. Or from the water, sorry. It draws the oxygen from the water, it enters the blood, and then enters the circulatory system, goes wherever the fish needs. Yeah.
How does it keep the two concentrations of oxygen from just balancing each other?
Not sure I know what you mean.
Well, the oxygen in the water goes from 100% down to 15.
Right.
So there's so many molecules of oxygen per so many molecules of water, yet the oxygen in the blood goes from 5 up to 90. So there's so many molecules of oxygen per blood. I guess
It's because as it comes in, the blood has low oxygen. As the water comes in, it has high oxygen. And it's this concentration gradient that sets up, that causes the oxygen to be drawn out of the water. And then the blood will, in exchange, dump carbon dioxide in.
but it appears that they don't balance. It appears
Oh, I see
that
what you're saying.
most
Because it's not 100% efficient. So you're never going to take 100% of the oxygen out of the water. You can only get 80%, maybe 90 on a good day.
I guess what I'm saying is that, like when we talked about diffusion and osmosis, we talked about there being a semi-permeable membrane where certain things could pass through, but other things could not pass through. And what I'm confused about here is that it seems like the oxygen should be able to pass either direction, yet it appears that
It just flows in
oxygen
one
only-
direction.
Yes.
Well, it's the concentration gradient because there's more oxygen in this and less in this, so the oxygen is going to flow down the concentration gradient. Now, carbon dioxide is going to be higher here, lower there. They don't show you that. So while the oxygen is flowing this way, carbon dioxide is flowing that way. And both carbon dioxide and oxygen molecules are relatively small, so they'll be able to pass the blood vessel through the gills into the water and the oxygen the other way. That makes sense?
Actually,
So that concentration gradient, the difference in that causes the oxygen to flow out and the carbon dioxide to flow into the water. Trachea. Now, this is not our trachea that we're talking about. We're talking about trachea specifically in insects. Branching system of air tubes throughout an insect's body. Finest branches extend to almost every cell. Efficient in small insects, but larger insects must ventilate. Trachea open to the outside. So basically, we talked about the spiracles on the side of the grasshopper's body. That what happens is these tubes lead to those spiracles. And as the air comes in, it finds that these original tubes from the spiracles start to branch, and they continue to branch until almost every cell of the insect's body is in direct contact with these tubes, bringing oxygen directly into it, or air from the outside. You don't need lungs, you don't need gills, you're bringing air into almost every single cell of the organism. That's why it works really well with small insects. You get bigger insects, it doesn't work so well. Anybody ever seen a Madagascar hissing cockroach? You see them in movies all the time because I don't believe they have wings. I don't think they can fly, so they're easy to maintain on the set. They've got spiracles on the side of their body, just like most insects. And what they do is when they feel threatened, they force air out of those spiracles, which makes them hiss, thus giving the name hissing cockroach. Well, think about it. You're walking along the forest floor, you're hungry, you pick one up, you put it in your mouth, all of a sudden something in your mouth starts to hiss. What are you going to do?
Spit it out.
Spit it out. That's its defense mechanism. It'll force something like a bird or a lizard or something like that figures it out. It's like, oh, wait a second. Duh. By the time it goes to look for it, it could be gone, scampered off, hiding under a leaflet or something like that. Well, the same method it uses to force the air out is how these guys bring air into their body, just in reverse. So through those same trachea, through all these branching vessels, this is what brings air to almost every cell of the body. Again, excellent for smaller insects, doesn't work so well for larger. For the more advanced organisms, we have lungs restricted to a specific region, using the circulatory system to expand functions. Well, that's what we've been talking about with the circulatory system all day. That we're too big for diffusion, so in order to carry out everything we need to get oxygen to all parts of our body, rid of carbon dioxide, move nutrients and all kinds of materials around, we need a circulatory system to get us there. So we can bring air in to our lungs, but it's the circulatory system that carries the oxygen away, brings the carbon dioxide back. Found in spiders, terrestrial snails, and terrestrial vertebrates. And here's those alveolar sacs I was talking about. They kind of look like a bunch of grapes. Structurally, basically. Breathing, alternate inhalation, exhalation of air, ventilates lungs. Breathe in, breathe out. That's breathing. I know. Duh, like you couldn't figure that out on your own. That gets me to the next thing, the diaphragm. Sheet of skeletal muscle that increases lung volume when contracted. Is breathing voluntary or involuntary? Kind of both. You can sit there and take a deep breath if you think about it. You can inhale, hold your breath, exhale afterwards. You can control it somewhat, but you don't have to sit there and think about every breath you take. Police song. What, singing police? No, forget it. Too old. So a sheet of skeletal muscle that increases lung volume when contracted. That's what causes you to breathe. And it forms a parachute, basically dome over the liver. It's basically the separation of the thoracic and abdominal cavities. When you go dissect the fetal pig, you will see the diaphragm in there. Fun to know facts, in addition to lungs, birds possess 8 or 9 air sacs that work on moving air. Air moves unidirectionally, one way in birds, renewed in lungs with every exhalation. So here's the lungs of birds. They breathe in, and it just kind of circulates through the body. Bones, pneumatides, there's a good word for you for the day. They have air sacs, and remember, they're not hollow, they have air spaces. They have front and back air sacs. So as the air comes in, it goes through the posterior air sacs, the lungs, the anterior air sacs, and then out. Pretty efficient. What makes them such great sliders? Pronghorn antelope. It's fun to know facts. Just relax. We're going to get out of here 5 minutes early anyway. High rate of oxygen consumption, larger lung surface area for diffusion. They have high cardiac output, greater muscle mass, higher body temperatures, high volume density of mitochondria. All this goes into allowing them to be fast runners. How fast? They hit speeds of about 60 miles per hour. Is there anything in this country today to catch a pronghorn antelope? Don't say people. Well, yeah, I was up in my ATV over the weekend and we shot us a few big pronghorn antelope. Mounted them up on the wall. Right next to Bambi and Rudolph. Do what?
Is that just talking about America?
Yeah. North Central. Pretty fun.
No.
There's nothing today that can hunt them that fast. They can outrun wolves, they can outrun mountain lions, but if there's something that fast, there had to be something just as fast chasing them. And this goes back to the fact that we used to have a cheetah in the Americas. It was bigger than the African cheetah, and it could run these things down. Not really related to the African cheetah, at least not directly. Common ancestor, probably more closely related to the mountain lion. That's why it's funny when you see, when they talk about pictures of the American cheetah, that's usually a mountain lion with a cheetah's tail, which I don't think that would really work, but that's what they go with. Small lungs, large spleen for the whittle seal, high blood volume for myoglobin concentration, oxygen carriers in the muscles, myoglobin, blood supply of root to the central nervous system, eyes and adrenal glands away from muscles. This is when it's diving. It's one of the deeper diving animals that stay underwater relatively long periods of time. ATP derived from fermentation when oxygen is depleted, so if it's switched from aerobic to anaerobic respiration, you swim effortlessly with lower metabolism. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this, just like I brought up the American cheetah. You ever heard of people, maybe you don't so much, but you hear about it back east like once every year or so. You hear about somebody that went into a pond and they were underwater for a while and they were resuscitated, brought back, and they make almost a full recovery. Wow, 20, 30, 45 minutes. What they theorize about is that all this stuff happens even in humans because it taps into a very primitive part of our brain that's known as the mammalian diving reflex. That is, aquatic mammals dive in cold water, all this stuff happens. The blood stays in the core of the body, it's shunted away from the extremities. That you switch from aerobic cellular respiration to anaerobic cellular respiration. All these things that help you to stay underwater longer. And maybe somewhere in our brain there's still the capacity to do that in extreme circumstances. It happens. As far as the birds, the pronghorn antelope and this, it won't be on the exam, just fun to know facts, that's all. Any questions about anything?